Hello everyone. Razorblade Mango here. And today I am here to talk about one of the biggest games of the year, which is Sucker Punch's Ghost of Yōtei. And obviously this is developed by Sucker Punch, like I said, who of course developed the original Sly Cooper trilogy, the Infamous games, the original Ghost game, Ghost of Tsushima, and now we have Ghost of Yōtei, published of course by Sony Interactive Entertainment, one of the most highly anticipated games of the year. And yeah, so Ghost of Yōtei to me is... So I'll start right out of the gate by saying that I really like this game. I think even with the big problems I have with it, I think the fun that I got out of the game during my 80-hour, 100% completion playthrough got me, like how much volume of fun that I had. I think for the most part, it outweighs a lot of my frustrations with the game, because a lot of the game is you exploring this open world, running around, fighting enemies, taking in the sights, that kind of stuff, finding side quests. And a lot of that stuff I thought was damn fun. Like I loved, there are moments in Ghost of Yōtei that I fucking love. I think they are so much fun, just from an exploration perspective or from a challenging combat perspective, just how deeply moved I was with certain things in the game and how atmospheric and immersive the game is in other respects. And just overall, I think Ghost of Yōtei is a damn fine game. Unfortunately, I think in their effort to try to experiment with a more semi-non-linear approach that it takes with its exploration and storytelling, that's where I think the problems definitely creep in. I would say the vast majority of my problems with this game come from its narrative structure, its writing, and its pacing. So I'm gonna save that stuff for later, because in order to talk about it, I do have to spoil certain things that they haven't showed in the trailers, at least to my knowledge they haven't. So I'll save that stuff for later, and I'll talk about everything else before that. And I'll give you all a warning before I start talking about the narrative. I'm not going to go fully into the ending or anything like that. There are certain story beats that I have to talk about. And it's been over a month since this game came out. So if you played it, cool. If you haven't, then I think I'm going to give you guys enough of an idea of my thoughts on it before I get into the spoilery stuff to where you can just tune out, and whether you want to play it or not, that's ultimately up to you. So, the positives with this game. Surprise, surprise. Ghost of Yōtei is one of the most beautiful games ever made. Now, I think going into Yōtei, I was a bit apprehensive about what Yōtei could do to wow me coming off of Tsushima, because I will go on record that I think Ghost of Tsushima is the most beautiful video game ever made. Definitely not the best as far as raw technical detail or anything like that, because there are definitely bad facial animation, there's stiff body language, some of the textures just look a little iffy, animations sometimes don't work properly because of the way they're positioned on the map or anything like that. In that respect, no, Ghost of Tsushima is not the most beautiful game ever made, but I care, if you guys know me, I care way more about art direction, color palette, weather effects, particle effects, how certain things in the environments blend together to create a visually pleasing experience. Like I would say something like Persona 5 is one of the most beautiful games ever made, and that has graphics that look like PS3 era shit if we're talking technical detail. But you know what? I don't care, because Ghost of Yōtei follows that same philosophy. And in an era where I think especially PlayStation Studios is guilty of this with a lot of their games, is that I think so much attention is paid to facial animation and body language and raw detail, things like that, that we sometimes forget to put some more effort into the art direction or the color palette of a game and making it look visually distinct compared to other things and creating those moments of awe instead of just trying to make Aloy's nostril hair look realistic or Kratos, the light shining off of Kratos' bald head as pretty as possible. And there are trade-offs, definitely noticeable trade-offs in Ghost of Yōtei, where, again, you have the facial animation, which kind of sucks in certain sequences. You have the stiff body language during... It's basically my same complaints from Ghost of Tsushima as far as the technical details not looking so great. But to me, that doesn't matter, because I think the way Yōtei uses lighting and color palette and shadows and atmosphere and weather effects and sound design is I think, along with Tsushima, it's in a class of its own. And like I said earlier, I didn't think I could be wowed anymore by the sights and moments of beauty that I hadn't already seen in Tsushima. But I was floored. I mean, over and over and over again, I'm talking jaw open, staring at the screen for multiple minutes, turning the camera around slowly to kind of just soak in the atmosphere and just going, wow. And I must have said that word out loud. This is one of those games where I just sat in front of my TV and I played it, and I must have just been saying, wow, over and over and over again. I'm telling you guys, my screenshot button on my PS5 controller, that thing got a workout during this game. I must have like 25, 30 different screenshots on my PS5, just moments where I went, holy shit, I have to capture this. Oh my god, this looks stunning. Wow, 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 wow. Just over and over and over again. Like I always say, graphics quality is not everything. As long as the game is fun, I mostly don't care. And make no mistake, Ghost of Yōtei is fun. But this is one of those games where the art direction and the atmosphere is so front and center to this game's identity and what it's trying to sell you on, the fantasy of being a samurai in Japan and kind of the exaggerated visual elements that we know of and associate with Japan. That is so paramount to the identity of Ghost of Tsushima and Ghost of Yōtei that this is why I put more emphasis on things like the art and the graphics and stuff like that for these games, because I do think in this case they do matter. Music. Let's talk about music. Music is excellent. This might be a hot take, but after playing through the game and listening to the soundtrack a lot outside of the game, I'm gonna go with the opinion that I think this game's soundtrack is much better than Tsushima's. I think Ghost of Tsushima has some like really beautiful tracks in it, obviously, but a lot of this game's soundtrack, I'm referring to Yōtei, it reminds me a lot of the work of Ennio Morricone, the late great Ennio Morricone, who of course did the score behind classics like the Dollars trilogy, Once Upon a Time in the West, The Thing. He did the score for Tarantino's Hateful Eight and stuff like that. This score in Yōtei, it reminds me a lot of the music for Once Upon a Time in the West in particular, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And if you want to endear me to your music immediately, remind me of that game's or that movie's soundtrack, because it is one of the best movie soundtracks of all time, in my opinion. And I love the diversity that's brought to it. I love the more spaghetti western feel that some tracks have, especially the battle ones. The track that plays during some of the boss fights when you're going against the Yōtei 6, it's the shamisen, it's doing the whole like that whole thing, where it's the spaghetti western kind of shit, where they used to use like electric guitars and unique instruments to create a sense of anticipation and tension, and it's got that in it, and I love that stuff. And then as far as the more traditional orchestral kind of stuff, that all sounds great. A lot of the tracks that are attached to certain areas of the game are very evocative. They sell you on the atmosphere that the visuals are trying to convey extremely well. Beautiful marriage between visuals and music throughout this game. I think audio-visual perspective, this is easily one of the best games of the year. This is one of those games where I just love walking around in and kind of just taking my time to explore and soaking in what I'm looking at, enjoying the color palette, messing around with the photo stuff where I can get certain lighting conditions just right in order to look at how a certain place would look during a certain day with a specific kind of music. And it's just so good. Love it. Gameplay. Love the combat in this game. And I don't think it's that much different compared to Ghost of Tsushima's combat, because instead of stances, you now have different weapons. So instead of like, you know, what they used to do where you'd flip over stances depending on what enemy you get, now you have to change weapons. And I believe from what I remember, there's about 6 weapons that you can acquire throughout the game that aren't long range, that they're like the combat focused ones. And I actually recommend playing this game on hard mode because I found it to be a damn fun challenge. I mean, even after later in the game, like tens of hours into the game, even after acquiring many upgrades and new weapons, this game does a great job of keeping you on your toes, because even the regular mob enemies that you can encounter in the open world, never mind the harder enemies that come to the, you know, try to fuck you up later in the game while you're exploring the open world, regular mob enemies will cut you to shreds if you aren't careful, especially during the early game. And granted, you know, I'm playing on hard mode, but still, I was surprised by how challenging the combat was, at least in the early game. And I think the difficulty curve throughout this game, it maintains a very nice, steady pace of you increasing in power, giving you just enough of a taste of feeling like you're getting better, you're getting more weapons, you're getting more abilities, but you still have to be on the lookout for regular enemies, or that odd enemy that's afar that has a gun or a bow and arrow that could just really mess with what you're trying to do if you're not careful. And I think it walks this really great line between too easy and too hard. It's just right in the middle, and I found that to be very, very satisfying to navigate and to overcome the different combat challenges that the game throws at you. Because as far as mobs go, it is I would say it's harder than Ghost of Tsushima, because there are some combat situations where you get saddled with very different types of enemies all in this one single mob that's coming after you. And by that point, if you haven't mastered the different abilities that you have and you don't have the right weapons to deal with it, they're gonna fuck you up. You're done. Atsu, done. So that I really loved. I also loved how smooth the combat felt. It's a similar compliment I have for Ghost of Tsushima. I think it's even better as far as combat smoothness, where it feels great to weapon swap. It gives you this awesome feeling of power when you like perfect parry an enemy and then they stagger, and then you get in there and do an attack where you just slice their arm off or slice their head off or something like that. Again, like I said, this game does a great job of making you feel powerful while ratcheting up the difficulty and keeping you on your toes. It's this difficulty balancing act that's really hard for a lot of games to do, and I think Yōtei actually does it. In recent memory, it's one of the best games I've played in that respect. Another thing I found to be really surprising about Ghosts of Yōtei is how many different types of random activities and well-hidden side quests there were. Because, look, I love Ghost of Tsushima. I actually would give the edge to Ghost of Tsushima over Yōtei. But one of the things that I really, really did not like about Ghost of Tsushima is how it has that structure of the Ubisoft checklist, where it gives you this idea of how many different icons on a map are in what area, and here's all the side quests that are here. It's like this long list, and it doesn't really have that. It does a much better job of hiding that in Ghost of Yōtei, so it doesn't feel as distracting. And I think Ghost of Yōtei also finds a way for you to go into a single area and be surprised by different random encounters and hidden side quests. As an example, there's one area early in the game that I went through quite a few, for a pretty decent length of time when I was going through the beginning of the game. And then I came back later And after I'd beaten the game, the main story, and I was surprised by how many things I had missed. I had completely missed this side quest where you encounter these guards that are hiding out in this cave, and you have to go back to the inn to get medicine for one of them, and then a bounty hunter follows you, so you have to take care of that guy. I missed that side quest. I also missed one of the mythic tales that was just hiding in plain sight there, and the game really doesn't tell you, unless you really want it to, where certain things are. It has this middle ground where you can play it as, immersively as you want. You can turn off the bird that leads you to certain things. You don't have to buy map icons from the cartographer. You can not use any of the shamisen stuff where you're playing it and then the wind kicks in and it shows you where to go to find certain things. It gives you that option of playing it just like that, on, I guess what you would call the experienced mode, and something like Breath of the Wild, where it turns off a lot of the hub stuff. Oh, no, the HUD, excuse me, the HUD stuff in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Or you can play it with a lot of these things on, but it's your choice. It's ultimately up to you whether you want to do these things or not. And I found it to be a much more immersive experience if I did not engage with the cartographer, if I did not have the bird on to show me where things are, if I did not have the wind on the shamisen set to a different type of activity that it could guide me to certain places. I just found it to be a much more enjoyable experience exploring this open world, just going out on my own and figuring out what to do on my own. That is where I think the game is at its best as far as exploration and side quests. And I think as far as the map and signposting as well, they've done a much better job this time around at making those elements feel more diegetic. Where I know that things like the bird and the fox and the wind, they are technically diegetic in Ghost of Tsushima, but unfortunately it's things like the maps that really disappoint because it just kind of feels more video gamey. This time around, you have the things like the diegetic elements like the birds and the wind and the fox, if you even wanted to have those on. But as far as the map goes, one detail I really like this time around is that the icons on the map are designed to look like as if Atsu is painting them. So if you find something out in the world and you can use your eyeglass to find things out in the distance, and it'll mark them on the map automatically as like a point of interest. It'll show it on the map, not as this generic list icon where you're like, oh, here's so-and-so area 1 out of 2 that you've discovered in area C or whatever. It looks like Atsu is painting an icon on the map. And when you're done with it, Atsu will then paint a little brushstroke through it to show the player, hey, you've already done this, so you're good. It adds a lot to making the icons feel more organic and less like checking off boxes. And it's a very small detail, but I really, really liked it from Ghost of Yōtei. Unfortunately, this is now where I have to get into the more negative elements of it, where I will be talking about things like the narrative and pacing and the writing, which, so this is where I'm gonna start revealing things about the story. So if you don't want to hear this is a point where you could tune out. I'll say this before I get into the story. I still feel like even with the complaints that I'm about to express, I still feel like this game is more than worthy of a purchase. Like I said, I had a lot of fun with this game. $70 with how beautiful it looks, how well it runs. I haven't even talked about the bugs or anything like that, because I think outside of one instance where Atsu fell through the map and one moment where the horse clipped through a rock I saw at one point, I think visually, from my experience, this game is flawless as far as frame rate, bugs, glitches, that kind of stuff. It's almost flawless. It looks beautiful and it runs extremely well. If you really want to get in on this, you haven't already bought it yet, I highly recommend this game. I really do. It's one of my favorite games of the year, even with the major problems I'm about to express. Some of you guys choose to opt out. So if you're away from your monitor or phone or whatever, I'll give you guys a few seconds before I start talking about the story and whatnot. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So, unfortunately, Ghost of Yōtei, I think in order to address the complaints that were there in Ghost of Tsushima about some people feeling like it was too linear, didn't encourage exploration enough, they, and by they I mean Sucker Punch have tried to adopt this more semi-non-linear approach to Ghost of Yōtei, and I think it kind of it works with the exploration. I will say anything that has to do with the exploration, I think it kind of works. And I've heard from some people that they're annoyed that the whole game is not this big open map, that it's not really an open world. That's why I say it's semi non-linear, where it's divided into areas that are broken up by loading screens. And I'm okay with that personally, as long as the different environments are visually distinct. I felt like in each individual area in Ghost of Yōtei, they were all visually distinct, and that I'm perfectly fine with. It's the narrative that I have more of a problem with, where this approach to trying to kind of encourage the player to explore the story in whatever order they wish, or at least in order that Sucker Punch kind of creates for them, makes this narrative feel a lot more disjointed and frustrating and ultimately unsatisfying than it should. So, and a byproduct of this approach with the semi-non-linear storytelling is that the pacing never establishes a comfortable rhythm. Even when, like, I thought I was going to be following a good golden path, but by the end of my story, I felt like there were certain story moments that felt like they would have hit a lot harder had they been deliberately placed in a specific order in order to maximize the amount of, catharsis or whatever you get out of Atsu's story. Because to me, the story is just this jumbled mess of moments that either feel like they're too early in the story or too late, and then these like flashback sequences where you learn about Atsu's past and what happened the night that her family was killed by the Yōtei 6. That all just feels jumbled together, and it's just, you kind of, if you're doing like a big story thing and then you come back later and you do the open world stuff and then you come back more after that, so much time has passed between that stuff that it kind of feels like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And now I'm like, for me at least, I completely forgot about certain elements of Atsu's story that I just went, oh yeah, that's right, that this is happening. Whereas I felt like the structure in Ghost of Tsushima, where Jin is isolated to a specific area and only has there are story moments that he has to do in a specific order in order to get to the next area and then the next area after that. Look, people can call that, too restrictive, not encouraging exploration enough, whatever. For me, that kind of approach works way better than something like what Ghost of Yōtei tries and fails to do, where there is no real golden path, or at least without any kind of prior knowledge going into the game. And I'll give an example, and this is where I'll spoil an element. In the story, you find out that Atsu's brother is alive. Like, because in the beginning of the story, Atsu thinks her mother, father, brother are dead. But in one of the areas where you're pursuing one of the Yōtei 6, you find out that he's still alive. So that immediately undercuts some of Atsu's revenge quest. That moment for me happened like very early on in the story, where I decided, once I was done with a certain area, I decided to go this way, because the game doesn't really tell you one way or another what kind of difficulty you're going to be expecting or anything like that. And again, it's a risk that it takes with this semi non-linear approach that I think doesn't really work, because I felt like Atsu learning that her brother was still alive was something that should have happened later on in the story. And it almost feels like there's a big part of the story that's missing in the beginning to kind of act as a tutorial for the game. And I think the way they do that, and I don't know this for sure, but I feel like the pursuit of the snake, that one member of the Yōtei 6 that opens the game, I felt like that would have been better served as the opening area to the game rather than the prologue before the title sequence. I thought the opening to this game, the opening maybe like few hours or so, was terrible. Like it really threw me off for a long time. Like many hours it threw me off because of how like unexpectedly bad the opening of this game is, where it just rushes you into this flashback that stops halfway through, and then it rushes you into this boss fight with one of the Yōtei 6. So it's like, all right, one of the 6 is already dead. And I'm not against a game starting out with a boss fight. I mean, look at God of War 3, which I think has an awesome opening because you're going against Poseidon. But that game started with a boss fight because it wanted to carry the momentum from the ending of God of War 2, you climbing up Mount Olympus to face the gods and tear it all down, into the beginning of God of War 3. It makes sense to me doing it like that. It doesn't make much sense to me from this perspective, or at least if it did, the execution of it was so bad that I felt like that was not the right call to make with Ghost of Yōtei, because it kind of just hurries you into a flashback, then it hurries you into a boss fight, and then it hurries you into like a really shitty version of the iconic title sequence from Ghost of Tsushima, where Jin is riding through the flower field and he leans down from his horse as he brushes his fingers along the flowers, and like that whole sequence in Ghost of Tsushima is awesome, but it feels like it's well deserved after about an hour of buildup of you being taken to like your absolute low point, where you just get the shit kicked out. You and the Japanese army get the shit kicked out of them by the Mongolians, and then your uncle gets kidnapped, and then you're like thrown off a bridge and you're rescued, but you're almost like on the brink of death and stuff like that. That moment when you're then flying through the flower fields and it gives you this beautiful atmospheric shot of Tsushima, all that felt well earned in Ghost of Tsushima. It does not in Ghost of Yōtei. In my opinion, it does not, because it just feels way too rushed, not satisfying, not well paced, not well done at all. So that really threw me off for a long time. And then, because the pacing never really establishes a comfortable rhythm, even once I got my bearings as far as the game goes, by that point, I was just not invested in Atsu's story anywhere near to the degree I was in Jin's. And I think this gets into the writing aspect. Unfortunately, I know people like to shit on that IGN article that they put out where the writer talked about how they were tired of these games talking about grief and trauma, and how like all of these are like I'm not going to say that something like the stories of grief that have been talked about in the recent PlayStation games are exactly the same. And unfortunately, it's a similar problem here, where I just feel like there's no real powerful new exploration. It's not really doing anything or saying anything with these kind of themes that I haven't already seen before. And I feel like after Expedition 33, which tackled grief and trauma in such a refreshing, does not pull its punches kind of way, that to me was like the be all end all of these big AAA games exploring grief and trauma. Like I'm kind of over it at this point. What I was surprised by with Atsu's story was that how long the revenge element went on. Because from the trailers, the way they were talking about it, I was kind of hopeful that the revenge story would only maybe take about half of this. And again, this is going into like well, you're criticizing it for what it's not compared to what it is. And I get that, but I just felt like the revenge story was nowhere near as substantive enough to carry Atsu throughout her entire journey in this game. I feel like maybe half of the game should have been that, and then the other half should have been her trying to build a life outside of it, which to me would have been a lot more interesting, because there's already a version of the story that kind of exists that you can watch right now, and it's called Blue-Eyed Samurai, where it follows a similarly angry, vengeful female samurai who is exploring Japan, going through these like changing times with these like dueling factions of armies and warlords and stuff like that, and her navigating her way through it. But the difference between Blue-Eyed Samurai, and I don't love Blue-Eyed Samurai, I think it's good. I like it quite a bit. I don't think it's great. The difference between the two is that I feel like Blue-Eyed Samurai's writing is a lot more impactful. And I feel like the main character in Blue-Eyed Samurai is just a lot more interesting compared to Atsu. And again, a lot of my disconnect from Atsu's story, it comes from this very disjointed narrative that ends up occurring and the really lousy pacing that it has because of the semi-nonlinear approach that Sucker Punch is taking with the story. And the writing also, like I said, it's just, I just don't think anything Atsu says is particularly insightful. I don't think any of these other characters are really all that great. I think some of them are okay, but a lot of them are just, I don't even remember most of the characters in this game. Like, meanwhile, all these months later, I'm still thinking about the characters in Expedition 33. I still think about the characters in God of War Ragnarok. There are definitely story games that I think about to this very day. I still think about moments in Ghost of Tsushima, the story, that I found to be just extremely impactful. Like, when I look at Ghost of Tsushima's final cutscene, if you go with the honor your uncle ending, that is still a deeply moving ending. And I feel like the final 10 to 15 minutes or so of Ghost of Tsushima is better and more emotionally impactful than anything in Ghost of Yōtei. This game commits one of like my pet peeves as far as these like big AAA Sony PlayStation game, where it really tries to like pull on your heartstrings by like shoving a kid into the narrative. And I think when Jubei, who is Atsu's brother in this game, he makes a remark later on in the story where he says, "Atsu, I have something to tell you." And immediately my mind went to, oh, he has a kid or he has a family. Sure enough, a few hours later, you find out Jubei has a kid. And when I saw that Jubei had a kid, it was almost like a map of where I figured the story was going to go kind of appeared in my mind. And I went, oh no, don't do this story where, you know, the guilt that Atsu feels for continuing her vengeance is going to come from this fucking kid lecturing Atsu and you having to rescue either the kid or Jubei or things like that from the main villain. And it's like the main villain finds out, ooh, Jubei is alive and he has a kid. Ooh, I'm gonna go kidnap that kid and force Atsu to come after me. And it's like, I saw like everything that this game tries to pull. I feel like I saw it coming a mile away just because of that kid being introduced into the story. And of course, the kid is sassy and independent, and it's like, all right, I've seen this before. I've seen this with Ellie. I've seen this with Atreus. I've seen this with other characters. Again, I felt like this story would have been a lot more interesting had Atsu's vengeance quest finished at like the halfway point. You wipe out all the Yōtei 6 by the midpoint. And then the other portion of the game is her trying to pursue something meaningful in her life that's bigger than herself, or taking on a bigger conflict, like with the Shogun or something like that. That's really like where I thought this was going in my head. And then they bring in that fucking kid and I go, oh, no, that's not where this is going. Speaking of that, like, I just thought so many attempts at emotion in this game just felt so flat and corny to me. There's one moment that I brought it up in the posts that I put up about this game on the channel last month, where I kind of gave a little sneak peek at some of my thoughts on the game. There's a moment where you see the flashback where Atsu's mother is being killed by the Yōtei 6, and they like hang her from the tree that's on the like Atsu's family's property. And, you know, watching a kid see their mother being hanged by a group of villainous people who had just murdered their father previously, that should be a pretty brutal and disturbing moment. But for me, it was completely undercut and almost rendered laughable by one totally unnecessary addition that, like I said, I thought was corny as hell. And it's her, the mom, going like, Atsu, sing to me. Let me, sing to me while I'm being hanged in this tree. And then you hear Atsu like, saying, like humming, like trying to hum in order to distract her from the fact that her mom is being hanged before her eyes. And I don't know if this makes me sound like some psychopath or something, laughing at a woman being hanged from a tree in front of her child. But again, it goes to show like what a small little addition could completely undercut a moment for me. Just really corny, so unnecessary. And people think it's like, oh, you're just picking on that one moment. There are other moments in this game that have that kind of effect for me. It's almost like desperate to make you feel things, where it's like, look, we've bumped up the emotion. These characters are yelling things in anger and expressing feelings. Like, don't you feel things? And I'm going, no, I'm not. Because you haven't done a good job at making me care about the relationships with these characters and Atsu compared to Jin and stuff like that. Like, I just don't. I know there's some people that think this story is far superior than Ghost of Tsushima's story. I don't understand that whatsoever. I think Jin's story was way more compelling than this, like, frankly, like, really generic revenge plot kind of thing. And you can make the argument that there are elements of Ghost of Tsushima that are really generic, and I don't think I would argue against that. But as far as for me, as far as emotional impact and execution, nah. Nah. Ghost of Tsushima does it way better. Now, I will say, there is one segment in this game that I thought was so emotionally moving. Probably like the most emotionally moving part of the game for me. And it's you being in this area where the Ainu people are settled. And if you don't know what that is, the Ainu people, they're like one of the indigenous populations that were in Japan, a bigger population back then at the time than they are now. And what moved me about it is how respectful and atmospheric I thought that whole segment was. Where, like, and it's a shame that a lot of that is optional. I guess it should be, you know, it's good in theory that it's optional because it doesn't slow the pacing down if you want to pursue the Yōtei 6 beyond the area that this place is in. But to me, there's just so much better character development and writing and emotional impact in this, like, one small area of the game than there is in everything else. There's a moment in particular where you are assisting this one character with completing this Ainu ritual. And to me, just this, like, small but meaningful ritual that the Ainu people were doing, that's like this small but meaningful ritual of love and acceptance that occurs in this side story. That moment, it, like, hit me like a truck. And it's not like I, like, burst out into tears or, like, crying or anything like that, but I felt it. Like, I really felt it in my like, heart of hearts, that I did not get that same feeling throughout the rest of the story. And to me, that moment was far more subtle than whatever heartstrings the game is trying to pull during the things that they're trying to do to pull my heartstrings in the main story. That just made me go like, oh, just, like, I'm not feeling this. The whole game, honestly, I almost wish there was, like, a spin-off of this area in the game where it's like a different character, maybe somebody who is part of the Ainu people who takes up the ghost mantle, and you get to explore a more, like, expansive version of this, like, Ainu culture and Ainu area, like that stuff, where it's like this beautiful, like, absolutely, like, stunningly beautiful forest environment that's like surrounded by these tall mountains, and then it's this beautiful soft music that's playing on the wind, and then you wander through the village and people, again, diegetic, you have people from the Ainu tribe playing music on different instruments, and it's just, oh my god, it's this just like one area in the game. That's like, that to me is like A+ material. That stuff right there is like, to me, that moment in the game, like that environment, that's in a league of its own compared to the rest of the game. Anyway, do I still recommend Ghost of Yōtei? Yes, I still do. I still recommend it. Highly recommend it, actually. One of my favorite games of the year. It's just, unfortunately, I feel like and it really speaks to how much I love the rest of the game, that I feel like the main story could be, like, so frustrating and unsatisfying that it's, like, balanced out by everything else. Like, it speaks to how much I respect everything else in this game and greatly enjoy it, that I'm still willing to come here and say, hey, just know the story is not good, not that great, but the rest of it, just, So fucking good. Such awesome. So fucking awesome. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on Ghosts of Yōtei. Let me know what you thought about it. And as always, I am Razorblade Mango. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.